All right, so thank you so much for helping me out with this project. This is my dad, Dustin Burke.
Cool. Yes.
Cool. So you make your living playing the guitar a lot, but do you know anything about like where the guitar comes from or the history of it at all?
Everything that there is.
Everything there's cool. So that's the end of the presentation. That you guys can come.
Good.
Yeah, we're good. We're good. So do you want to tell them about the origin, the history?
You know what? I'll tell you what. Why don't you start?
Okay,
and
cool.
I'll just jump in if you get it wrong.
Lovely. I'll do that. So the guitar is a member of the chordophone family. We're getting the basics off like first.
Okay.
So chordophone in Greek literally just means chord is string and phonos is sound. So literally just a box with strings on it that you can plug is a chordophone. A lot of these are different ancient ancestors of the guitar, and some of them are which are still played today. We have like the tanbur, the tar, the kartar, and things like. And you'll notice tar, the same thing as guitar.
Oh, okay.
Tar, I forget which language it is, but it means string. And
Okay.
so like kartar.
Like what
means
kind of time frame is that?
Well, that's still being played today in a lot of
really?
like a lot of these instruments that I'll show you are still being played. I mean, I have a Baroque guitar right here.
Right.
A lot of these instruments are still being played today, but this, the tanbur, I don't have a date for a lot. Actually, in fact, a lot of these instruments, I don't really have a date for you. I have more of an era.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, because it's hard to kind of gauge a lot of those things. But so we will a lot of these other instruments. It's really difficult to say which instrument we know for sure
That's
eventually.
dope.
Yeah, for real. It's hard to say which instrument for sure that became the guitar because there are just so many. Like past a certain time, we don't really have enough evidence to say for sure this became the guitar. So the furthest back that we can go, we can probably go further back than this, but the furthest back that I'm going to go for the purposes of this is the Arabic oud. We don't have a date on it. It's been around for thousands of years. It's an Arabic, like Middle Eastern instrument. So it's got the kind of bowl teardrop shape that you'll is familiar.
Fretless?
It is fretless actually, and there's a good reason for that. So when we play with frets, we have just 12 notes in our scale, right? But in Arabic and Middle Eastern music, they have what's called maqams. So maqams are like their scales, and they have way more than 12 notes, like
Really?
in between the things, right? And so like they have like half flats and sometimes they're like even split into multiple things between.
They still use it's like the same seven.
I don't know, to be honest. I would imagine that they'd have a different system, but I don't quote me on that.
And if it would be like A half sharp, or
yeah, well, we would call it that. If we're if it's a Westerner learning to play the oud, then yeah. So it's they were played with a plectrum. It's like a pick is what we would use as a plectrum today.
Okay.
Historically, kind of metal. They would use an eagle's quill. Which is fun.
That's
I
cool.
feel like a metal guitarist should play.
Yeah,
eagle's quill.
exactly.
And so yeah, it's super cool instrument. So I'm gonna show you.
Is it strung like a mando, or is that totally different?
How do you mean like
Oh no, I'm sorry. There's an extra. Was that set up like a Baroque guitar?
Yes. So that's a perfect thing that I can bring up now. So there are 6 sets of strings.
Okay. And it's like the Baroque, right? The top one is.
Yeah, the top. Well,
single?
on this one it's the bottom one.
Oh, okay.
So on a Baroque guitar, the top it's strung like double, kind of like a 12-string guitar, like a mandolin. But the top one is kept single. When you're in European music, it's called the chanterelle, which means singing string.
Okay.
I'm not sure what they would call it there, but yes, they had one string that was
cool.
single, which is super cool. So I can define for you what a course is. So when you have a mandolin, you have 8 strings, but you kind of treat them as 4 strings, right? Because they're doubled.
Yeah.
So it would be a mandolin is a 4-course instrument.
Okay.
And a 12-string guitar is still treat it as 6-course, right?
Okay, cool.
And courses can be 2 strings, 3 strings.
Okay.
You don't really get much higher than 3 strings, but you could
Is that
theoretically do 4
the
strings.
lute has a bunch of strings, right?
Yeah. So well, depending on the type of lute, there are.
Sorry, that's probably there.
We'll get into that.
Cool.
No, but I super appreciate the questions, and so yeah. So here I'll get into a little example of the music that would be played on the oud, and so kind of listen to if like with your kind of aural skills, like for the relationship between them, and you'll notice a lot of these kind of in between tones.
Not as simple as like 1, 4, 5.
Yeah, right, for real. So this is going to be Brandon Aker playing a Turkish, I believe it's Turkish, tune called Üsküdar Giderken. I probably, I guarantee you I didn't pronounce that right. But it's being played on the oud.
Okay.
Yeah, for real. There we go. So that's
cool, man.
Brendan Aker
I
playing
love the
Uskudara Gedera.
fretless gives it that's like it's you actually hear some notes in the middle of that slide.
Yeah,
you know,
just
it's
kind of
pretty
like a violin glissando
Yeah,
is way
yeah,
different
yeah.
from that on a guitar or a piano. Cool. So that is the music of the oud, and so this oud, you'll notice when I bug you a lot about I love lutes and I want to get a lute and all these things. So from pictures of lutes that I've shown you, you'll probably notice the similarities between the oud and the lute. Basically, you slap some frets on there and you've got a lute.
Oh, okay.
And so that's pretty much how it happened. So in 711, the Moors invaded Spain, and they brought with them the oud, like that was being played. It was a very, very like heavily cultural instrument, like and so they brought it over with them, and the Spaniards saw this and they were like, "Whoa, that's pretty cool." So they in Spain, this is during the medieval period, early medieval period. And they took it and they started playing the oud with their own music. A lot like if you or I tried to play this, we would find it very difficult to stay in tune and all of these things. There's no frets. And for the Middle Easterns, that is very good because they have so many notes that they need to play. But for us, we only need 12. And so they took some of the gut that was they used for their strings, and you've heard me say this before, but their strings were made of sheep's intestine. They dried and wound, and so they took some of that same gut and they just tied it around the fingerboard and made it into a fretboard. That is how the lute came to be, and this is all like the different the evolution of the lute throughout the Renaissance and Baroque period. So we would have had it in this early medieval period, a lute kind of like this. Yeah, it's very kind of ornamented and stuff like that.
Yeah. Like stained glassy right there.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So this is a modern recreation, obviously, and they probably took some creative liberty. But you'll see now.
Is that original? That looks like old school.
Yes, this is this I found from a museum website. So this is an original one, but these ones are all looks like modern recreations.
Cool.
So this and during the medieval period, they had 4, maybe 5 courses on it. And they still played it with a pick. They played it much the same with like oud, and it sounded a lot like the oud. They just had frets on it. But during the Renaissance period, which is this over here is a Renaissance lute, you'll notice we're adding more strings, which is also a very common in the history of the lute, which we can get into in a different episode maybe if you want to learn about the lute. They kept wanting like lower and lower notes to accompany like the vocalists that would be playing with, and so you can see they 4, 7, like 10, 13, you know, like there are arch lutes that have 3 head boxes that have like 18 or 20 courses. They just kept adding strings. And so with the Renaissance lute,
do they still is it kind of like a like if you had like a 7-string guitar, it still stays in steps?
Yes, it is. So in fact a 7-course Renaissance lute, which would be early Renaissance, is tuned. You can play exactly like a guitar if you have but the very top string will be the B.
Okay.
And so, most a 6-course Renaissance lute would be like if you took your G on your guitar, tuned it down to an F sharp, and then put a capo 3, and then you have a lute. That's exactly like a lute.
That's true.
And so you'll notice that if you've ever like counted out the steps in a guitar, it's tuned in fourths with 1 major third, right? The G to the B. So on a lute, it's also tuned in fourths with 1 major third, but it's on a different string.
Okay, cool.
It would be on the D to the F sharp instead of the G to the B.
Oh.
So yeah, they an interesting thing happened during the Renaissance period with the lute is they realized that hey, if we drop this pick that we're playing with and we just play with our fingers, we can create this beautiful polyphony using multiple voices to create this like super intricate music that the lute can be a solo instrument. It doesn't need accompaniment, it doesn't need a band or anything like that. And so
narcissistic much?
Fair enough. You know what? That's fair.
We don't need no stinking band.
Right, cool. Lovely. So yeah, if the and with that kind of the idea of the lute being the lute and string instruments being solo instruments led way into the guitar. Because the guitar, it came around the 1500s, was what we can call the first guitar.
And this is like 700s?
Yeah, this is like 14, 16,
okay,
to
cool.
15, 16, 14, 15,
But
16.
this was pretty much the guitar for 1,000 years.
Oh yeah, there was no guitar before.
Yeah, this was a stringed instrument for 1,000 years.
Yeah. And then around this time, we would see the Renaissance guitar in between these two,
Okay.
and then the Baroque guitar in between these two. So these overlap with the history of the guitar,
Okay.
but these kind of existed before that.
Okay, gotcha,
before.
gotcha.
So yeah, with this, they kept adding strings on this one because they liked that really polyphonic sound
Okay.
that came with it. But with the guitar's original purpose was not to play polyphony. It could, but it was to play chords.
Okay.
So have you ever picked up I know we have ukuleles. Have you ever picked one up and tried to strum along with it?
Yeah.
The chords are insanely easy.
Yeah,
Anybody, no matter their musical experience, can learn to play the ukulele in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And that was the point of it. So that was where we got the Renaissance guitar. So the Renaissance guitar came around in about 1500, and its purpose was to play chords and just accompany a voice. And so you'll notice it has 4 courses. Again, the top one being the chanterelle, the singing string, because it kind of whatever note is being played kind of stands out a little bit because of the timbral difference. And it was tuned G C E A. It's a ukulele.
Okay.
In fact, the Portuguese brought this to the Polynesian Islands, and that's how the ukulele became. So the Hawaiians and the Polynesians didn't invent the ukulele. It was invented in Europe, and the Portuguese brought it over. It's much similar to how the Moors brought the oud to Spain.
Okay.
A lot of invasion is how this instrument got spread. There's a history of violence.
See, war brings beautiful music.
Fair enough.
Violence brings great songs. I don't know, it's weird.
So, yes, so this, I obviously had Brandon Aker play, my hero, play something on the oud because I couldn't even begin to play something like that. But for all of these other instruments, I have audio of myself playing it. And so I will, John Dowland is a prolific lutenist from the Renaissance period. Lutenist kind of wrote stuff for lutes and plucked stringed instruments like that. And so this is what I'm about to play. Or I just have a recording because I don't trust myself to play perfectly live.
Okay, exactly.
But it is Pavana Lacrime, and so which he later added words to create his famous piece "Flow My Tears."
Okay.
And so this is the instrumental version that I will play
on
now.
the ukulele.
No, on a guitar. All of these are being played on my classical guitar for ease sake. Notice the different voices, and it's kind of almost like separate instruments playing together. So that's an excerpt from Pavana Lacrime.
Well done.
Thank you. So that was obviously the just for solo.
That'd be like basically a type of song played on this instrument.
Yeah, well, on the lute, on something like this, it might be a little bit easier to play. There have been renditions for the Renaissance guitar as well, and the Baroque guitar and things. John Dowland was a prolific guitarist who made a lot of the repertoire from that era.
Cool.
And so it's for, you can probably find a rendition for any of these early instruments. So as we saw with the lute, when you need a wider range, like here, people started to do polyphony, even though it wasn't designed to do polyphony. And if you've ever tried to do like fingerstyle on a ukulele, you'll notice like, wow, I need more strings.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
as we saw with the lute, starting with 4 and going up to like 18 and 20, what's the trend? Just add another
strings.
Add more strings. And so from the Renaissance guitar, we get the Baroque guitar, which is this dude right here that I am proud to call my own. I love this thing so much. Actually, this is the model of the same historical recreation. Yeah, boom. And so you'll notice that they get very, very ornate.
Happy graduation, by the way.
Thank you very much. Thank you. At least one good thing came out of a COVID graduation.
Yeah, no joke, right?
So you'll notice a lot of these get like really ornate and like intricate. especially with the rows. Most of the time, there were some that were 2-dimensional, like a lute, but a lot of times it's like a 3-dimensional. I know, it's like
Incredible.
it goes like in a spiral cone 3-dimensional shape.
Is that just like aesthetics, or is that
All of this was just aesthetics. It's from the Baroque era, and the word Baroque literally just means overly ornate.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's literally what the word means. And so it's as it implies, they just did things. And there's no benefit of having a rose in a lute versus a hole. Like the ouds had just a hole, right?
Yeah.
They just wanted to make it look pretty, and so that's
cool.
that's literally the only reason. Same with like the mustache bridge that has kind of become. Every single Baroque guitar I've ever seen has some form of like a mustache
cool.
bridge like that, and it's just aesthetics. Yeah, so this guitar, so obviously the other one was tuned GCEA, right, which is like a ukulele, which you could think of as the top 4 strings of guitar with a capo on it, right?
Okay, yeah.
But this guitar was tuned A, D, G, B, E, which sounds really familiar, right? All you're
Yeah.
missing is the low E string, and we're
Right.
almost there. We've almost arrived.
Yeah, right.
And so,
this is something I can play.
right, almost. Which you could play this if you just imagined taking off the when you were too lazy to replace the string downstairs. That's you had a Baroque guitar
Right,
for a while. It was this guitar became known for its versatility. It was still very much so used to strum like the Renaissance guitar was, but it was also there's lots of repertoire for picking and beautiful melodies and things like that.
And isn't this where a lot of the pieces I've heard you do are real percussive too?
Yes, that was what this was known for.
Yeah.
So they have rasgueado became the word for is strumming playing and like just boom,
Yeah.
and punteado is like the plucking like kind of stuff like that. And so yes, a lot of it was very percussive, very loud, very
Yeah.
and so there was actually a word for that they had. They called it musico ridosa, which means loud and ridiculous music. Everybody hated this music. Like
I mean, living playing musical ridiculous.
Right, you're playing musical ridiculous. Parallels can be drawn to today's
I like
music
it.
of the older generation. Like that's not music.
Yeah, right,
And so, which is very interesting because it was kind of like the heavy metal of the period, or like what punk or whatever, of just rebellious music. And when you listen to it, it's like nice classical music,
right,
and so
exactly.
parallels can definitely be drawn to today's music, and I'm sure people might fall asleep to thrash metal at some point.
Yeah,
in the future,
right,
because
exactly.
as I put on some of this when I'm in bed. And so yes, this one I also have an excerpt of this thing. You've probably heard this a million times because I played all the time on this dude and on my classical. So this is Santiago de Murcia was a fantastic Baroque guitarist, and he was super well known. Obviously, I'm drawing from very well known people, kind of staples of the instrument when I'm providing examples. And so this is his fandango. So a fandango is a type of Baroque ground, kind of like if you do you know what a ground is? So if
like in terms of music.
Yeah. So if we were both to just have guitars and I said, hey, let's do a 12-bar blues in A, you would know how to do that, right? 1/4, 1/5.
Oh yeah, you told me that's the version of that style of music.
Yeah. So a ground is
Isn't
like
it jazz. Is this what's that called in jazz? You had me play something in
oh,
jazz.
it's like a standard. Like
Okay.
you could say that. You could call it a standard. But like kind of a blues is always 1/4, 1/5, 4/1, right?
Right.
And so if we were to go, hey, let's play a fandango. It's 1/5, 1/5. If we were
Is that a fandango is a ground?
Yes, and there's also La Folias. Hey, let's play a Folias.
Okay.
Is another type of ground, a chord progression. And
So
things like
the 12-bar blues is a ground.
yeah, you could call it a ground,
Okay,
even though
gotcha.
it's not from the Baroque period. Or
Gotcha.
classical musicians, they would probably know what it is, but they might not be as apt to play a 12-bar blues.
Okay, cool.
And so this is Santiago de Santiago de Murcia's fandango.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, for real. It's just 1/5, 1/5.
Is this on your Baroque guitar?
No, I'm playing this on my classical guitar right now. All of these are my classical guitar. Just for
Oh yeah, sorry.
So this right now would be the rasgueado technique, and then it goes into the punteado. Thank you. And back into like the loud, like
Yeah.
people would be like banging on their guitars and doing all these percussive things that I can't do.
Nice.
So that is Santiago de Murcia's Fandango. So we're almost there.
Cool.
At the end of the Baroque era, there was a
What in the world? Is somebody cutting down my house?
yeah, for real.
I should have shut the windows, shouldn't I?
It's
Is
alright.
that you good?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
all good.
cool.
I can, if I can record with geese honking like right in my like, for my audition that I did,
That's
yeah,
funny.
I can.
Right.
This isn't gonna be.
Okay, cool.
Cool. So at the end of the Baroque era, again, what's the trend? You need more
strings.
slap another string on
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
So there was, there were some very late Baroque guitars that had that were just like this, that had 6 courses.
Okay.
Although that wasn't very common, and it only lasted for a little bit longer because because then you get into the same kind of problem as a lute, where it's like you get a lot of strings,
Yeah.
and which on a lute you like because it has like sympathetic resonation and things like that. But on when you're trying to play chords,
Yeah.
like lutes aren't made to play chords;
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
made
yeah.
to pick and things. Like so when you're trying to play chords as well, having all of these strings just isn't good. And so, but in 1750, this dude in Naples named Sebarezze was the savior of guitarists for that problem because he invented wound strings.
Okay.
So right now we have courses because especially with gut, especially on the lower ends, it's very tubby. Like on the upper register, it's very delicate and light and airy, but when you get into the lower strings, really thick strings, it just kind of sounds like boom.
Okay.
Boom.
Yeah.
And so we don't really like that as much, which is why a lot of these strings that are lower are octaves, because it kind of rings out still while still having that initial like low end. And so, but with wound strings, you get a nice, like in a really low. It sustains. It does all these things, and so they eventually ditched the double coursings altogether and had 6 single course strings. E, B, G, D, A, E.
Familiar.
So that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So if you were to pick up one of these, it would feel weird because it's not the same like scale length and it's like a different shape. But you could play one of these. So we've arrived at something where if you were shunted back in time, you could still make a living because you could play. You could play. I mean, I guess you could have custom ordered an instrument, but you could. These are commonplace.
Wild.
Yeah,
It's gonna play it up on the body
Yeah.
of the guitar.
it's like and actually.
Somebody basically like, let me just make a cutaway just so you can actually
Yeah,
play.
for real. Although that didn't come around until much later.
Right.
But a lot of people, when they look at this, they're like, "Oh, these were probably just for decorations." Like they probably didn't use all of these frets. They totally did.
Yeah.
And in fact, I didn't have this prepared, so I'm gonna cut out a little bit while I find it. But I want to show you an example of somebody doing that on a romantic guitar. So yeah, you probably think a lot like that they don't use the entire fret, but they did. There was some virtuosic music that was being created, especially by people like Fernando Sor. Both this instrument was interesting because it served 2 functions kind of. It was you have people like Fernando Sor making these incredible pieces of virtuosic music that is insanely difficult even by modern standards. In fact, the piece that I've been complaining about that I got assigned is a Fernando Sor piece. But you also have, so around this era, people are, there isn't such thing as like a plugging in music into your iPad or whatever and listening to it. If you want to hear music, you have to buy a ticket and go see music being played. And so this instrument was being used as there were people who were writing music for beginners to play during this era. So like they were writing music that was sounded nice but wasn't very technically difficult, and it became kind of an amateur instrument, as well as a kind of like virtuosic thing, which kind of persists today, because if somebody says, "Oh, I play guitar," you don't know if they're going to be like strumming G, C, D, or if they're gonna like like it's and there's really no in between kind of.
Right. How serious do they take it? Right?
Yeah, right. And so, so you have another interesting little tidbit of information. This is called the romantic guitar. But all of these things kind of are named after the era that they're in, but this kind of existed during the classical period. Fernando Sor was a classical guitar composer. Same with guitar composers like Barrios and people like that. This is the guitar that they would have been playing, but it's referred to as the romantic guitar. Likewise, that guitar that I have right there is what we would call a classical guitar, but that was what people like Tárrega and Jóbit would have played during the Romantic period.
Okay.
So it's weird because the classical guitar was played during the Romantic period, and the Romantic guitar was played during the classical period.
What makes that, for instance, like a romantic guitar? Is it like
well, because it
just the era?
Yeah, this is the era that it lived in. It has a bit of a different sound to it as well. But I don't know why.
Like if you merge like a parlor style acoustic with the classical guitar, you kind of
get kind of. It's even got like a little pin bridge, and that was important because wound strings much more tension than gut strings, because nylon wouldn't be invented until much later. And so they would put wound strings on them. Sometimes the bridge would just fly right off, and it would just pop off. And so they need the luthier Stauffer in Vienna made this pin bridge that fastened the strings to them, and he kind of widely popularized this as both like a respected virtuosic instrument and a beginner's instrument in Vienna, to where he made guitars, where Vienna kind of became like guitar mania with this kind of guitar. So yeah, I'm not quite sure why the names are flipped. I would guess that it has something to do with the fact that classical music has kind of become an umbrella term.
Okay.
Kind of like how if you're listening, whether you're listening to Mozart or Chopin or Bach, like you call it classical music. Even though
way different.
Yeah, even though Bach is not classical, he's Baroque, and Chopin is not classical, he's Romantic.
So if you're listening to one of these songs, would you say that's classical music? Would you say that's romantic?
Yes, and even Tárrega, like in the modern interpretation, I would still, even though he's romantic,
gotcha.
we would call it classical music because it's kind of been an umbrella term.
Gotcha.
And then what do we do with the classical period guitar? Well, some people played it in the Romantic period, so let's call it the romantic guitar.
The classical is the pop is the new classical. I don't know what it is. It's pop.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair. So yeah. This is very similar to the kind of classical guitar that I have right there that I play, but there are some key differences. Like the shape has a very different sound to it. In fact, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a while when the same dude that played Uskudara Gederkin, Brandon Aker, he played on a romantic guitar, a Tárrega piece. Romantic guitar from the classical era for Tárrega, a romantic composer. Gets very confusing, but yes, he played it just to show off his new guitar. And you even noticed as passing by, like, oh my God, there's no way that sound can come from that instrument. Like I don't know if you remember that, but it does have a very different sound, timbrally from a classical guitar. But there aren't nearly as many differences from the romantic guitar as the modern classical guitar. This is what we see today. This is what I have right there. This is my bread and butter, what I play. I got off there's one more variation after this, but I got off the train here. Okay. And so the difference between the romantic guitar and this guitar, we have this dude to thank. So this is Antonio de Torres. He was a luthier and probably the most important luthier to the history of the guitar.
Thank you.
Even though he didn't change too much, he just whereas there was really no standard. Like if you played the guitar, pre-Torres, you could have meant the romantic guitar, the Baroque guitar, the Renaissance guitar. They were all the guitar. this dude is responsible for making the guitar.
Okay.
And so he made a new body shape and a new type of bracing that just completely revolutionized the sound, and especially with people like Francisco Tarraga. You've heard that name a lot. I love his music, and I learn a lot of his stuff. Super prolific guitarist of the Romantic period, actual Romantic period.
Okay.
And he played a Torres. He was like, this is what a guitar ought to be. And so many other guitarists kind of agreed. And so this became the new standard for, all guitars. And we have this dude to thank for it. It has a much louder, fuller sound, and it became so widespread that it even became the national instrument of Spain. And so, yeah. So if we go back to the previous guitar before this, the Romantic guitar, do you remember the luthier's name? You said Gesundheit. Don't look at my notes. Don't look.
No.
Stauffer was his name.
Okay.
And so Stauffer had the dude who made the Romantic guitar, the one before this, had an apprentice whom you may recognize.
Okay.
C.F. Martin
Okay.
was an apprentice. Yeah, we have a Martin right there. Was an apprentice of Stauffer. And so in 1833, he moved to New York with his family, and he kind of created this guitar industry in America. And he created the modern guitar, the modern kind of acoustic guitar. So there are a few key differences. You'll notice same body shape as Tarraga's model. Even early ones still even had the same headstock, even though there's really no difference between headstocks, and the dude's mowing his lawn again. There's really no difference timbrally. Little difference timbrally between
But
headstocks.
you said wound. So did the last guitar have wound strings?
The classical guitar?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I know. These aren't. Are these considered wound strings?
Yes. So if you
Okay.
hand that to me. Sorry, that was very demanding. I didn't mean to.
Oh,
So-
okay. Yeah, it is.
So they have these strings are nylon. Historically, they would have been gut. I had
Yeah.
some Nyla gut strings, but they wore out, so now I'm just using nylon again.
Okay.
Because I can't, because Nyla gut and gut strings are very expensive.
Yeah.
And your boy's broke.
right.
But these are wound strings.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is, I believe these are silk wound strings. So you can either have a piece of gut with metal winding around it, which is just a really thin piece of wire that they wind around it.
Okay.
You can have it be gut, silk, or nylon. I believe these are silk wound strings,
Okay.
which I prefer. Even if I have Nyla gut strings, I prefer silk wound strings on a classical guitar. That's all preference. That's what the sound. So and the Romantic guitar had this as well. We have like Severuzzi again in Naples who invented them, and they kind of became nowadays even on lutes and historical occasions. Like I have some wound strings on this guy. This isn't historical. That's
Okay.
we all have Severuzzi to thank for that because they just are better. So if you're
last longer.
they last longer. You can get gut wound strings and they sound different from gut strings, which is why some luthists still prefer to have all gut. But I mean, I think they sound better depending on the string. Sort of the lower strings, because it provides the same kind of like warm sound while still just having more sustain. And so yeah. But even with silk and nylon wound strings, it still provides a very delicate sound. Like when you hear me practicing in my room, it's not anything like if I were to be strumming along on a regular acoustic or a electric guitar. It's very delicate, beautiful, intimate sound. But
the approach is so different too.
Right.
It affects the sound. I mean,
100%.
You're not gonna hammer down on a pick on your classical.
Yeah,
or
very
Baroque,
true.
so-
But that's what people tried to do when they very first started. So they played like in bands, and they would try to strum away on a classical guitar. And I don't really do that because I have other guitars. If I were to like play like folk music or like other things like that, or what would have been popular at the time. But you'll notice if you do that on a classical guitar with nylon strings, it's very quiet still.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
lot quieter than you would easily overpower me on a standard guitar.
Sure.
And so when they were playing with banjos and mandolins and things like that have wire strings, metal strings, and a guitar would be playing, it was like, dude, we can't hear you. Like,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
this lovely feature of the guitar, its delicate, intimate sound was no longer a positive. It was like I can't. Are you playing or no?
Yeah, right.
And so they decided to put the wire strings that were being on banjos and mandolins on guitars. Just like though with like the reason they had the pin bridge on the romantic guitar, the tension is so much greater, especially with all wire strings. It's so much more tension. If you were to go and bend like a nylon string, like you can bend it like super far up, way more than you can bend an acoustic guitar because this tension is so much higher. And so he needed to find a way to around this. So Martin came up with a new X bracing system where the way that you braced it affects the sound and the structural integrity of it. The way that he braced it both made it stronger and louder and produced a much brighter sound. And it was perfect for the music that they'd be playing at the time. And so with that, he turned the classical guitar into this kind of guitar. And we have arrived at the modern guitar. You have one of these hanging up on your wall even. So now we have taken a journey all the way from the oud to something that you play.
So finally something I can relate to.
Any thoughts on that?
No, I just want to say thank you to CF Martin.
Thank you, CF Martin. Yes.
Thank
Thank you to Torres. For me, I got off the train there.
Yeah, right on. No, dude, it's awesome. It's crazy that they're all in essence guitars, but I mean you invested to learn how to play world guitars.
Yeah.
This is the guy that I know how to play.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah.
so it's amazing that a box with strings can create so many different genres and eras of music.
Oh yeah.
It's pretty dope.
Yeah, it's like it really does span like so
Yeah.
many different things. Even with just this guitar,
Oh,
like,
they
how many
yeah.
genres it's in
Yeah, and then
music.
obviously it continues to evolve from here.
Oh yeah,
you know?
and that's a great point as well. Like that we're not when we evolve with the guitar, we're not getting to a better and better product. Like people still play the Baroque guitars and the classical guitars and the ukuleles or the Renaissance guitars, and so we aren't in pursuit of a better instrument. It's they evolve with the tastes and the genres of the music at the time. And so it's cool that this one instrument has been across so many different, like had its toes in so many different pools of water. Like when you think of the violin, like there have been different iterations and even like you can trace it back to like the viola da gamba and like those big bowed instruments, but they all kind of like super similar functions, similar unless you have like a fiddle or something. So similar function, all that the guitar has a rich and diverse history. Which I think is super cool.
Yeah, and we're not even to the.
Oh yeah, we're not. That would be something that you'd have to teach me about. After Martin, I don't know a whole lot. Something to do with Les Paul, but I don't know a whole lot about that. Lovely.
I love it.
I hope you learned something new.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
I'll do this. Can I teach it next?
Oh yeah, 100%. Hey, now I
Okay,
can teach it. You can
nice.
have my notes.
Yeah, cool. I'm
Just-
down.
Awesome. Perfect.